The Darkangel Chapter 13 Change of Heart. When Ariel opened her eyes, all was as it had been a few moments before. The Icarus lay pale and still on his crumpled black wings. The 13 wraiths stood wan and motionless around him. Ariel arose at last and walked past them to the vampire. She knelt beside him and unfastened the necklace from his throat. His flesh was colourless and cold as death. Her hands were shaking. At first she feared to see him rot and fall to ashes at her touch, but he breathed on. And then she fully expected him to awake from the feigned sleep and strangle her, but he did not stir. She lifted the leaden chain in her hand and unhooked the first vial from its link. She turned and held it up. "Whose soul is this?" she asked. One of the wraiths came forward, perhaps the most bent and wasted of them. "It is mine," she said, her voice so thin it sounded little more than wind. "You must help me." The wraith's emaciated fingers closed about Ariel's hand. She helped the creature raise the leaden vessel to her lipless mouth and drink. For such a tiny vial it seemed she drank a very long time. And when she was done, the wraith stepped back, but she was no longer a wraith. She now had eyes where only hollows had been, and though her body was as starved and fleshless as before, there was now an energy about it, almost a glow. "My name is Maria," said the creature, who was no longer a wraith. Her voice was soft and full, very beautiful. "I was a daughter of a gooseherd in the forested hills of Bern. I was tending my flocks in the meadows one morning when the Darkangel seized me." Then, before she'd quite spoken the last of it, her body fell away into dust. Her bones crumbled and settled in a heap, yet still she stood there before Ariel, or rather it was another being that stood in her place, a being made of a soft yellow light that retained a human shape. The shift Ariel had woven for her draped softly about her, but the outline of her form shone faintly through. She looked to Ariel like a beautiful young woman. "See me as I was before," the spirit said. "Now that you have given me back my soul, I have no more use for my body. My heart and my lifeblood are gone irreplaceably. I am no longer of this world, so I must leave body behind. But this," she touched the kirtle, "which you have given me I will retain, for love is immortal and eternal, and will not wither in the endless deeps of heaven." The spirit rose, her image grew thinner, more transparent, and her soft light diffused. She ascended more swiftly as Ariel watched. Her garment rippled gently in some wind that Ariel could not feel. The spirit receded to the upper reaches of the night sky. Her light grew smaller and further away, until it seemed no more than a fallow star in the dark swatch of heavens where no other stars burned. Ariel gazed at the now motionless points of light a long moment before she could bring herself back to the task at hand. The other wraiths already were moaning and clamouring for their souls. Ariel gave out the vials one by one, and then watched as one by one the mummy women drank and their bodies fell away, leaving only the bright images of their souls. And each in turn told her their name and where she was from, and what she'd been in life, and how the vampire had taken her. And then slowly they ascended. Then Ariel gave the last wraith, the last vial but one, and when the creature drank and her body fell to dust, Ariel recognized the spirit's features, though they were made of golden light. "Edwin!" she cried softly. "Edwin!" "Yes, companion," the spirit said. Her voice was lovely, bell-like in tone, but still recognizably Edwin's. "You were my servant once, and I was careless of you, even as I was jealous of your fortitude." "I have no fortitude," Ariel whispered. The golden maid smiled. "When the Icarus took me, did you not go to avenge me, as a friend would have done, and not a slave?" "I was desperate," she protested softly. "I was in despair. Your father would have sold me." But the other spoke on, still smiling. "And when you found me amongst those others, a wretched, mindless wraith, still you came to us, though we were hideous to look at. You did not know which one I was, and so you loved us all for my sake. Now you have felled the Icarus, and returned to us our souls. 13 stars will burn bright in heaven for you, Ariel." So saying, she rose into the sky. Looking up, Iriel saw fixed stars in a patch of heavens that had formerly been dark. As she watched, the last of the spirits joined the constellation, a perfect tilted circle like a crown, or maidens dancing, save that one spot was empty. That will be my place, thought Iriel, when I depart the world. She looked down at the last empty vial on the leaden chain, and there my soul would have rested had I let the vampire take me. She laid the heavy chain down and gazed at the unconscious Darkangel. He lay absolutely still, save for his quiet, shallow breaths. Helpless now and unaware, he looked more pathetic than terrible, more wasted than ugly. Iriel touched the unbleeding and unhealing slashes on his shoulder and cheek. The awful coldness of his flesh numbed her fingertips. A great white light filled the darkened chamber. Iriel spun around. The Durrer stood in the doorway with a torch of rushlight in his hand. Iriel wondered how long it had been since sundown. No more than half an hour, surely. Only the time it had taken the Durrer to make his way up from the caverns and through the long twisting halls of the castle to this room. The little man was puffing and blowing when he entered, so she knew he must have hurried. Iriel wondered that she'd not heard him come in. "Ah, daughter," he panted. "I see you are quite well, so perhaps there was no need for all the haste I made. He had to pause for breath. I heard a scream." Iriel turned her face away and touched her wrist. "He caught hold of me," she murmured, "but the wraiths saved me." "The wraiths?" the little mage mused. "So they proved to be of use at last, and you did not need the dagger after all." He puffed a sigh and folded his hands. He nodded. "Well, I am glad." Iriel glanced back at him. "Your poison has done its work," she said, surprising herself with the stiffness of her tone. "What was it?" "Poison!" snorted the Durrer as he seated himself. "Daughter, it was hardly that. It was life, health, warmth. Call it what you will. It's in all the plants, in the nectar of the hornflowers, in animals. It's the dram that flows from the wellspring of Adelan and infuses all the waters of the world. Even in the dead lake of the Lorelei, there is a little of the water of life. Elsewise that mere would be truly dead, devoid even of her nearly dead creatures. Even she is yet a little alive." He indicated to the fallen Icarus, "As is he. But he is mostly dead, and it is the deadness in him that rejects the vigour of that dram." The Durrer took a quiet survey of the room before eyeing the little heaps of ashes on the floor. "Well," he said, "I see you've done with the vampires' wives. I must say I'm glad to see the last of that lot. All that wailing and moaning one could scarcely think." "Here is the knife," said Iriel. She drew it out from beneath her bridal gown and lifted the chain from around her neck. She'd spoken more to quiet him than from need, for he could plainly see it shining brighter than his torch. The Durrer's manner was the same as always, brisk and talkative, but just now it grated on her terribly. It seemed an abomination for him to run on so lightly in the face of the deed they were about to do, and she knew full well that they must kill the Icarus. A season passed. On the steeps of Terrain she had relished the thought, but now it sickened her, for she no longer feared him, nor loathed him, nor worshipped him as she had done before. She felt a curious kind of pity for him now, a pity for his present helplessness, and an almost longing for his former might. He had been terrible and evil, yes, but also very beautiful, and now they were going to destroy him, as he had meant to destroy the wraiths, this world, and her. Iriel reminded herself, yet the memory of his beauty haunted her, and she felt suddenly overwhelmed with a sorrow she did not entirely understand. Iriel held out the knife to the mage. "You do it," she told him, "'cause I cannot." The Durrer rose and came over to her and eyed her quizzically. "Daughter," he said, "only the children of the upperlands under the sky can wield that blade and strike true. It was not made for the hand of a son of the earth." "Of course," Iriel said softly. "I should have known." Bitterness and misery mixed with the pity in her breast as she took the dagger more firmly in her grasp. It seemed to have no weight at all. She closed both hands around its haft, glanced from the fallen Icarus to her companion. "Give me some word to bolster me in this," she begged him. "Plunge the blade into his heart," the Durrer said, "and it is done." There was no rancour in his voice, no malice at all. None the less, she was filled with disgust at his words and at herself, for she knew she must obey them. She gazed down at the Darkangel. He lay there yet, as still as death, and yet she knew he lived. She raised her blade above his breast and tried to close her eyes. She knew she could have done it, had only she shut her eyes, shut out the light of the lamps and the stars and the Durra's torch and blade, saying, "For Edwin," or "This is not killing, he is already dead," or "This is not the Darkangel, it's someone I do not know." But she could neither close her eyes, nor speak, nor move. She held the dagger bright above him for a very long time, before she lowered it slowly and laid it on the floor. "I cannot," she said. "I cannot kill him." "But you must," the Durra admonished her gently, tentatively, almost as if he was testing her. "There is nothing that I must do," snapped Iriel, more fiercely than she meant. She made her voice a little quieter, but no less firm. "I am free to make this choice, and I choose that he shall not die." They sat in silence for a very great while. She could not turn to face him, but she knew he was looking at her, studying her. She knew that he had trusted her, depended on her to do this thing. She had even convinced herself that it might be possible after all, only to discover now, at this last moment, that she could not. She had failed the mage and herself. One warm tear slid down her cheek, yet she felt strangely no great sorrow. "Well then, what do you propose to do with him?" the little man inquired. Iriel drew breath and was surprised to find it ragged. "I do not know. She was trying to say something, she knew, but she was not even quite sure herself what it was. "Tell me what you want," her companion said. Iriel bit her lip and touched the fallen Icarus's face. The icy chill of his cheek numbed her hand, but she did not care. "The Lorelei has drunk his blood, hardened his heart," she answered softly. "He is as much her prisoner as the wraiths were his. As I pitied them once, must I not pity him now? My heart—" Her breaths were coming so short now she had to pause. "My heart goes out to him. I want—" She stumbled and sat a moment silent. "I wish that I might save him from the witch as I had saved the wraiths from him." She turned to face the Durra now, and to her surprise found him eyeing her with the barest trace of a smile on his lips. She feared he was mocking her. "He is monstrous and evil," she cried, despairing. "I know it well, but his soul is still his own. There is that final spark of good in him." Her throat felt tighter than she'd ever known. She dropped her eyes. "He is not quite vampire yet." The little mage laughed softly then, and Iriel realized it was not mockery but approval that lit his eye. "It is that spark then, daughter," he said, "that you must seize and kindle if you are to save him." Iriel looked up at him. "What do you mean?" she said. "The Icari are made, not born," the Durra replied. "He was not always this way. He was a child of mortals once." "You mean the witch's doing may be undone?" cried Iriel. "He might become a man again?" The prospect astonished her. She feared it all vain hope and dreaming. The magician nodded dubiously. "Perhaps," he told her, "and perhaps." She felt a surge of anger in her breast. "Why did you not tell me this before?" she heard herself demanding. "I might have killed him needlessly." The Durra shook his head, smiling. "No, child, I did not think there was ever any danger of that, and I did not tell you before because nothing could have come of it. To heal requires true love, and you did not love him before, though I see now you are beginning to." Iriel stared at the mage, and her anger cooled slowly into astonishment. How could he say she loved the vampire? The thought had never occurred to her. Then it began to dawn in her mind, slow as sunrise, that perhaps she did in some ways love him. She admired the beauty, the magnificence, the grace and power that had once been his, but if this were love, it was not blind, for she still abhorred his cruelty, his cowardice, his impatient and imperious self-interest. She gazed at the Durra and said, "Yes, I do think I do love him in a way, and I do not want him to perish." She turned to look down at the fallen Darkangel now. "I want to save him. Tell me how." The little mage of Downwending said, "I cannot. My magic has no province here. The cure must come from you." Ariel gazed at him uncomprehending. I have skill at neither medicine nor magic, she said. It's not required, the Dora told her. Think, child. Think what ails him. Ariel looked down at the pale face of the vampire. He has no blood, she said. The water witch had drunk it all. He cannot live again as a mortal without blood. Then you must find him some, the magician said. But the only living blood in the world, insisted Ariel, flows in the veins of living creatures. I cannot kill one to save another. True, the Dora replied. Then it's helpless, cried Ariel, filled with rage at her own helplessness and the injustice of this pass. Her eyes burned with tears. Cup your hands and catch the tears, the mage instructed. He reached to bring her hands together in a bowl, and even as he spoke, the falling tears turned to blood that welled up and filled her hands in a moment. But I thought you said your magic, Ariel whispered, staring. Oh, this is not my doing, the Dora said. Greater magics than mine are afoot in this chamber, where blade and cup and dram are met with love such as yours. All lies in your hands now. Daughter, I am no more than your aid. Ariel stared at the living blood brimming her cupped hands, and then at the Darkangel. But this will not be enough, she said. It cannot be. It will suffice, the Dora said. As one drop of your charity spins an endless thread, so one tear of your true love will make enough for this. Then he tilted her hands, so the blood fell in a thin stream to the vampire's white breast, and there disappeared like rain into a thirsty earth. Ariel poured for a long, long time, before her hands were empty of blood. By that time, colour had come into the vampire's skin. He was no longer deathly white. No spot or stain was left upon his breast, and Ariel's hands were as clean and dry as before. She watched as the traces of blood arose to fill the slashes on his face and shoulder. She gazed at the Dora in wonderment. You are a wizard, she told him, and a great one. But again the Dora shook his head. I have done nothing, child, he told her, nor could I had I tried. Mages cannot work everything. Only the quality of your mercy could have accomplished. He cut himself off abruptly then, with a glance at the Darkangel. But haste, the little man cried, or he dies. You have given him his lifeblood back, but his heart is still lead. The dram he drank will sustain him for a little, but not long. She caught in her own breath sharply as she realized that the Icarus's breaths were fading. What must I do? Cried Ariel, but the Dora did not reply. The moment she sat gazing at him seemed to last many heartbeats, though she knew in truth it only spanned but 2. Then she resolved herself and spoke. The cure must come from me, you said. Very well. I have not come this far only to see him die. He must have a heart, a flesh to live, and if it must be mine, I'll freely give it. She did not look at the Dora again to see if he would try to stay her. Giving him no time to intercede or even speak, she reached for the dagger. Quickly but very carefully, she drew the bright blade down the vampire's breast. So keen was its edge that no blood sprang from the wound. His flesh parted, and amid the folds she found his heart, a cold, hard, dreary lump of lead. She lifted it out and set it down, a dry, bloodless, heavy metal weight. Then took up the blade again and turned it to her own breast. The shining blade was so keen, she felt no sting, only heat like the light of Solstar. Lifting her own heart from her breast, she felt only emptiness remain. She laid her heart of flesh within his open breast, then folded his flesh over again where it joined without a seam. She felt very tired, very spent, yet at the same time there was a curious lightness to her limbs. The colours of the room faded. She could not seem to keep her eyes open. Her breaths were growing short and shallow. It felt like the coming on of sleep, this dying. She sank onto the floor, laid her head down on her arm, and she closed her eyes.